My name's Richard Burgess. I'm from Borne Safety. We're based in the UK and we are compliance professionals and we're also a Manga UK partner. So I'm going to talk today about risk management because it's a topic that I see again and again when I audit companies, and it's something that, despite underpinning everything that we do when it comes to health and safety compliance, it's something that so many companies just still get plain wrong. And quite often when you go in, risk assessments and that side of things are sort of pieces of paper that collect dust and sit in a cupboard, and they're brought out once a year, or if an accident happens. And what they're not is part of a bigger risk management system, something that actively looks at risks and is updated on an ongoing basis. So who should be listening? So this webinar is aimed at compliance professionals. So for example, you might be a compliance professional and you are wanting to manage risks effectively within your organization, but are struggling to get engagement, buy-in, or to get management to sort of listen to your way of thinking. You might be a manager. You're going to have responsibilities for a department, an operation, people. With that is going to come responsibilities around risk management, but you might not be too sure about how you do that effectively and get value out of your risk management system. Or perhaps you might be a business owner, somebody who you know that you need to do something in terms of compliance, but you're not quite sure how to go about doing it. So the objective is to try and give you a clear understanding of the purpose of managing health and safety risks within your organisation, and also to understand, in addition to why we do it, what the legal requirements are for risk management, and finally how to actually go through a risk management process within your organisation. And just emphasising again the point that it's an ongoing basis. It's not a one-hit wonder. So why do we manage risks? Well, for starters, nobody really wants to get hurt, and some might, but generally speaking, human beings don't want to get hurt, and more so, we don't want to hurt other people as human beings. And therefore, we have a moral obligation as employers, also as employees, to our colleagues and our employer, to make sure that we act sensibly and we're not doing things that put other people at risk. Sometimes easier said than done, but in principle it's true. Legally, we have legal responsibilities. In terms of risk management, there are things that the law makes us do, and that really is, again, just an extension of what society expects of us in terms of managing risks. And then there's economic reasons. At the end of the day, if you've got an effective risk management process, it's going to save you time and money in your organisation. If you have an ineffective process, or you're thinking to yourself that there is no value in wasting time on risk assessments, they're just pieces of paper, I know what's safe, and phrases like that, then you do not have an effective risk management system within your organisation, and you are missing out on some key economic benefits. So how do we do this? So first of all, you need to have a good understanding of the hazards within your organisation. Many of you will, because you work in business and will have been doing so for a long time, or in your particular trade. And the obvious way to go about this is to use your eyes and your ears and have a look and see the sorts of things that might cause people harm in your workplace. In addition to using your own eyes and ears, you people as individuals have very unique experiences in life, and the mountain climber might have a completely different view on heights and risk of falls compared to somebody that the highest they've ever been is a couple of flights of steps. So people have different perspectives. So it's a case of making sure that you look at historical information in a particular workplace or operation, that you speak to people in those particular work areas, so speak to employees, engage with them, and listen to what they've got to say about the risks that they experience or that they believe exist in the workplace, so that you can consider all of them. And that consultation part is quite essential. So there's a legal requirement to consult with employees in terms of health and safety, and it's so valuable when it comes to risk management, because quite often, again, when auditing companies and you look at their risk management process, quite often they're just written by one person in an office, will sort of knock out a risk assessment. Seldom do they actually take the time to go out and engage with people, consult with them, and get feedback from the relevant sort of stakeholders for that particular activity or operation. And doing so is absolutely valuable, not only to identify the hazards, but also to get better engagement and buy-in when it comes to putting in place effective risk control measures, rather than deciding what they are without consultation, and then having an uphill struggle trying to put them in place when, lo and behold, nobody agrees with them because they had no involvement in their development. And finally, you can speak to consultants, or you can get information online from the health and safety executive, professional bodies, industry organisations. All of these places provide a whole heap of information that will help you identify the sort of key hazards within your organisation or type of business, which may be things that you've not personally experienced. So it's really important that you don't just produce a risk assessment out of your head. You need to go and look in places, speak to people, and get all of the facts before you progress. So you need to know what sort of things are going to hurt people in your business. Now, that's the first part. The next part is you need to understand who those hazards affect and how it might affect them. So it might be that you're doing your sort of visual walk around and you see a certain number of people in the workplace, and that's the people that you think are at risk. But there's plenty of other people that you need to be considering when you are assessing risks and looking at risk management within your business. Firstly, there might be seasonal workers, contractors. For example, I know in our offices we have a cleaner. I know we do because the office is always clean. My bin's always empty when I come in the morning, but I've never actually met them. But I know they come in every single day. Now they come into our workplace, they come into our car park, they come into our building, and they move around our work environments. But they do so at a time when things aren't happening. Perhaps they're there by themselves. You've got to think about people that don't normally work in those environments, or who work outside of the normal hours of occupation. And also people that might be specifically at risk as well. So, as a ordinary human being, there might be things that don't apply to you, but people that might be specifically at risk could be young people who don't have sort of certain experiences or enough life experience to really understand what the hazards are in a workplace. Certain young people might have never had a job before, certainly in more hazardous environments where they might be quite naive to some of the risks that might be present, and they might need special consideration. Similarly, sort of new or expectant mothers is another example of that, where certain hazards are going to put them specifically at risk, which under any other condition they'd be absolutely fine. Take manual handling, for example, someone on a production line. Well, when they get into later stages of pregnancy, there's going to be additional risks that you're going to need to consider and think about that wouldn't have been there 9 months ago. So we've identified the hazards. We know who might be harmed and how that might happen. We actually need to think about what we're going to do about it. Now, this is the risk assessment part, and it's the part at which we decide whether or not the current risk is acceptable and whether or not we need to do something about it. And we have to determine at some point whether we've done what's expected of us morally and legally, and in the eyes of any customer expectations too, perhaps, because these have factors, in order to control the risk satisfactorily. Now, the way we do that in UK law is we have to do what is reasonably practicable, and all that really means is that we have to look at the level of risk versus the time, cost and effort of doing something. So what it doesn't mean is that we have to spend lots of time and effort and money on something that might be insignificant. So, I work in an office, I'm looking at an office around me now, and I can see sort of paper. You could get a paper cut, but do we really care about that? Of course we don't. That is an insignificant risk. So in terms of doing what's reasonably practicable, we're going to do very little or nothing about that to make sure that we're focusing on the risks that we need to. What I'm also looking at out of our window is a warehouse here, where there's plant and vehicles moving around, there's pedestrians, and there's sort of walkways going through the warehouse. Now we've got some bigger risks. We've got hazards, yes, moving vehicles. People could get sort of crushed or roll over, or the forklift could cause damage or hit something, knock something over. The severity of that risk is a lot greater, so therefore, in terms of doing what's reasonably practicable, there's a bigger expectation that we will spend more time, cost and effort controlling that risk. So deciding on control measures, it still leaves a bit of ambiguity. Controlling risk is definitely one of those grey areas because people have quite strong opinions about, again, what they've experienced. We've all lived different lives, and if I've never seen a forklift truck before, never operated one, I'm probably going to have quite a different view on the risks compared to somebody that's operated one for the last 40 years. So again, when deciding on control measures, just like identifying the hazards in the first place, it's important to consult with people that do the job and a cross-section of representatives within your company to make sure that you come up with sensible control measures. Now, like with identifying hazards, you can go to the HSE website, you can speak to industry bodies, professional associations, training standards companies and things like that in respect of plant, for example, and you can see what expectations there are, what guidance is available to try and help you understand what might be reasonably practicable, rather than just basing it purely on your own sort of thought processes and subconscious sort of experiences. And then finally, once we've decided whether or not it's a significant risk or a insignificant risk, and we're putting in place control measures, we need to make sure that we decide how we're going to implement the control measures. So that means once we've decided that we need to do more to control the risk and make sure that we've done what's reasonably practical to control it, we're going to have to put in place control measures if it still remains, an unsatisfactory risk. Now, there's a certain hierarchy that you should follow when you're actually putting in place risk control measures, and that should start with trying to eliminate the hazard in the first place. Now, we can't eliminate all hazards in the workplace, whether you're sort of in an office or in a very high risk environment. There are always going to be hazards that cannot be eliminated. Short of shutting up shop and going home, which is obviously impractical, there are certain risks that are going to have to be tolerated. But if you can eliminate it, and a good example of that is window cleaners. So we've all seen window cleaners up ladders, and a lot of window cleaners will have falls from height, and obviously that's a high risk. Falling off a ladder is not a good thing. But a lot of professional window cleaners, certainly sort of window cleaners that work for businesses, will have lance operated cleaning systems where they're eliminating the need to work at height. Okay, they've introduced an additional hazard of manual handling, but when you weigh up the two, I think I'd rather be a bit sort of tired after a bit of hard work than falling from a ladder at the end of the day. So can you eliminate the risk? Where it can't be eliminated, can it be reduced? So coming back to the window cleaners again, perhaps they've introduced a manual handling risk of operating lances. Well, can they reduce that risk of manual handling? Well, of course they can. They might deliver training. They might put in place procedures that control sort of how often, how long people use them, and how they might use them in a way to try and reduce handling risks, or certainly the impact of manual handling risks. As you sort of go down the list, you might want to consider protective equipment and PPE, those sorts of items. Now, these are often considered a last resort control measure because at the end of the day, it's better to control the risk at source and stop it happening than it is just to give somebody a piece of PPE and say, well, if it does happen, it's okay because they've got a hard hat on. For example, I don't know, a roofer, for example, is working above people on a construction site. Well, it's better to stop the item falling from height in the first place than it is just to give everyone hard hats and say, well, so what if it falls off? It's just going to bounce off their hard hats. So we've identified the hazards, we've identified who might be harmed and how. We've made some sort of assessment of the risk, and we've decided which ones we need to control. Where we've decided that we need to do more because we haven't done what we feel is satisfactory or what is reasonably practicable, then we need to put in place additional control measures. We should start with trying to eliminate, reduce, implement controls, implement personal protective equipment in that order. Finally, we need to record what we've done. So a lot of systems, a lot of people will use paper-based systems to record their risk assessment process, and that's one method of recording a risk assessment. So the steps that I've talked about need to be recorded on paper, and there's plenty of examples of sort of good risk assessment templates out there. You can even get one off the Borne Safety website and download it. Or there's plenty of software systems out there, in particular Mango, for example, where you've got a risk control module, which will actually allow you to go through that process, exactly the steps that I've explained, through a software solution that you can do sort of either at your desktop or out in the workplace on a mobile device, and evidence that you've gone through the right steps in terms of identifying the hazards and controlling risks properly. So you must record what you've done from a risk management point of view. And ultimately, yes, it ends up being a piece of paper or a record, but that risk assessment is evidence that you've fulfilled your moral and legal obligations with regards to risk management in the workplace. And ultimately, whether you agree with recording them or not, it could be the thing that stands between you and a prosecution. It's demonstration that you have done what is expected of you. So it also is a very, very useful document to be able to refer back to if you do have incidents, or you're trying to remember what the control should be, or you're delivering training. A risk assessment document that demonstrates the risk management processes that you followed and what you're supposed to be doing becomes your sort of reference for delivering training to new starters, for example. Or if somebody does have an incident, you can refer back to your recorded risk management process and see, well, what was in place, why didn't it work, and what can we do to make it better. Finally, and I said at the beginning about risk management is an ongoing process. It's not something that you should do once and then sort of forget about for a year, pull out all the sort of risk assessment papers and then think, sort of, I've got to go through all these risk assessments that we've got. It's an ongoing process. So if things change, if incidents happen, or anything that gives you a cause to think that it might no longer be relevant, then you've got to look at your risk management system, and you've got to see what's working, what isn't, and that should be something that's done regularly. So just to summarize then, so risk management is something that we need to do morally. We've got a duty as employers and as employees to make sure that we behave responsibly and safely, and we've got a legal expectation. The Health and Safety at Work Act and the management regs in the UK make sure that we do risk assessments, and that they're suitable and sufficient, and that we do what's reasonably practicable. And we do them because, ultimately, if we don't manage risks in our workplace, there's going to be more downtime, more staff turnover, unhappy staff. There's going to be lost time through injuries. There's going to be claims, potentially prosecutions. Reputation can get affected. There's lots of sort of unmeasurable bits that come with poor risk management that are hugely wasteful for businesses as well. How do we do that? We follow the 5 steps that I talked about. We identify hazards in the workplace. We identify who might be harmed and how. We then look at and assess the risk and decide on control measures. We record what we do, and we review it. It's an ongoing thing, something that should be done regularly. So if you take away nothing from what I've said to you, risk management is an ongoing process. It must be done on a regular basis to get the most value out of the system. And if it's not something that you're looking at regularly, then you need to change that, and you need to look at it more frequently. You won't be getting the value that you could be getting out of your risk management process if you're not. Review and take action when required. So if you see something wrong, if you see something not working, you have to act on it, and you have to empower employees within your organisation to be able to raise those sorts of concerns and know that they're going to be followed up. Having suggestion boxes, or if you use software systems, people being able to report improvements directly into it like you do on Mango. And if you're not, like I keep saying, actually, if you're not getting value out of your system, you're probably doing it wrong, and you probably need to have a look at your system and go through the 5 steps and make sure that you're doing them effectively and getting value out of your system. So in terms of general information, you can visit the Borne Safety website for sort of resources, download templates, etc., or for advice. Also the mangolive.com website, there's lots of resources on there that are available to download that you can make use of. And also Health and Safety Executive is a great resource for guidance on all aspects of risk management, and ultimately it's the expectation of what the HSE think you need to do to comply with the law. So lots of good information documents on there. Otherwise, speak to other companies, speak to industry bodies and professional groups, or get advice from consultants. Thank you for listening, and good luck with your risk management processes.